Yeah, so I wanted to show you guys Neos VR, which is a little bit hard to describe. I like to think of it as a development environment for virtual reality because everything in here is adjustable and movable, and I can drag it around or pull it off. I can give various actions to objects. I can inspect them just like you would through your browser, like with DevTools. And the thing that I want to show you the most, which I'll spend the most time on, and feel free to ask questions as you go, is this Simply VC Cosmos VR application I've been developing. Um, so I'm going to open up my world switcher here. This is kind of like your browser tabs a little bit. Each one of these little orbs here represents a world that I currently have open. So I'm just going to go in here, and it's a quick switch into here. All right, so how to explain this application? Neos has a scripting ability. Let's start there. And this scripting ability allows me to create an application. The basic function here is getString, which allows me to pull data from a Node.js app that I've created. So this is running up on Heroku. That's the base URL, and I have that just joined here with this concatenator operation, string concatenator, with validators random. And this pulls in some data. I'm writing that data with the getString to a string variable and then displaying it. So you can see this data right now. It's kind of messy. It's just a comma delimited string, which I'm then going to parse into actual data in order to use for this little visualization here. Each of these little orbs basically will be controlled by the data coming from this. So this is a piece that I'm working on for this application. And you can see here, I'll let you read this a little bit. Welcome. It's a larger work in progress. What you see completed so far serves as a basis for a valid approach to working with data from the internet in VR. Pioneered by Bombitman, another guy in the Neos community, this approach has been proven useful for displaying simple data points in Neos VR. I hope to prove it a viable option for dynamic data visualization for spatial computing applications. So I want to get more complicated with this stuff. Right now I'm using this methodology for this piece of the application. Basically, this is a bit of a dashboard. You can kind of turn these. You can see how the interactions happen here. They face the user at all times. I can add some other sort of things like what I want to do is, these are just kind of icons that you'll be able to click, and they'll change the orbs that are up here. These orbs up here are buttons that I can click and reveal more of the application. So this right here is all using this sort of logics behind the scenes to populate the data that is within these. The one you can see moving the most is this proposer data, and you'll see it update every so often with a different proposer. This data is coming from this Node.js application running on Heroku, and that Node.js application is pulling data from an actual REST API. There's a bit of a limitation within Neos right now where you can't work really directly with a REST API. That will get improved over time. Right now, you can just get a string. And so these I've created within the Node.js application endpoints that I can call that simply return a string. They may do some calculations on the Node.js app, but they just return a string, and that's being pulled in and then displayed here. And then there's a little bit of logics behind this text right here that will allow, it just basically updates the time. So yeah, different buttons have different interactions. Got some extra information there. Can show and hide these. Here's another piece that I'm working on. This will be a larger application. This will take you into another experience where you can kind of explore and visualize the blockchain. So the idea would be that each one of these nodes is kind of a transaction in the blockchain, and you'd be able to kind of zoom through those and get more information about the transactions and what's happening there. And then this will be a live chart. I did have this texture animated, but this is just a prototype. This was just a texture, an image on a plane that would animate this way. But the idea here, and I have somebody else in the community I'm working with to do actual data visualization for block time history over time, so that I can create a line chart out of that data. And that work will be the basis for probably a lot of other data visualizations that we'll be able to do. Grabbing data from a REST API, getting it into Neos, and doing some sort of dynamic meshes that give you a good representation of an actual line chart. So that's a piece of that. To show you a little bit about what's behind, here's my to-do list. I can just draw within here. So some of the tools that I use, this is my avatar. You can see my hands are kind of robot-y. Modeled these in blocks. This is one I got from a friend. But I've added this button to my avatar that gives me kind of a tool shelf. Otherwise, I've got to go kind of into my inventory. There's a menu system built into Neos that gives you a bunch of things. I mean, New World, it's basically a new file that you create. Save them, close them. You have session information settings. There's a friend system because this can all be multiplayer. You can keep it private, or you could open it up and I could invite friends in here and we could interact with everything in here in real time. There's other places within Neos, other worlds that people have built. And there's an inventory system. So this inventory system basically houses various objects. Like I could put this floaty object into my inventory and then pull it out. Like here's some money. I can just spawn some money and then delete that. But this is how you basically get to a lot of your tools. It has essential tools. There's all kinds of tools. I find it a little more convenient to just keep those on my avatar in this little thing because then they're already loaded and I can pull them out. So this is a pen, and I can do things like just draw in the air. And so I can keep notes for myself. And then I can just grab that as an object and delete it if I want to. Put that back, delete. So there's that. There's also a file browser, so I can just browse my whole hard drive here and import things. So if I go into here, like here's a PNG file, I can import that as an image, and now I can just work with that image and do something with that image. Or I can import, any of my various models, and then you can manipulate them once they're in here. So like here's a model. Let's see, it just says model. So what is this? Hopefully safe for work. Yes. Okay. So here's a model I made in blocks, basically. And then I can add materials or animations to this within Neos. So that's real quick, just the inventory system, file browser. There's some debug options here that just kind of gives you some basic things about the actual world, various stats on how it's updating and things like that. So you can get down to like what your frames per second are and figure out like how could I optimize what I'm building here in order to have a better frame rate. Your account, you have like an account with that, and then you of course can exit. Yeah, so we got scripting, we've got uh, a Node.js application being brought in. Um, I also have uh, this tool right here. I'll show you guys this. This is highly relevant to your interests, I think. So this is a developer tooltip, and I think of this as kind of like we're web developers, and when we want to manipulate a two-dimensional web page, we open up our dev tools and we start manipulating it. That's what this is. It's a dev tool. So what I can do with this, let's see, I'll just take this to do. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to open my menu and open the inspector. And so this inspector is basically like your dev tools. This is all of the properties that make up this object in the world. It's doing some text rendering. You can see it says to do. And if I click here, a little keyboard comes up and I can actually change the text in here. So that's one way you can do things. You can change the size, you can change the color of the text, font materials, all kinds of stuff. And then you see all these other components here: bounding box driver, a box collider, so that there's a collider on this that allows me to grab it. There's text editor component on here that allows me to actually click here and edit the text rather than have to do it within the inspector. And then there's a touchable field text. That's part of when I click this. These two components kind of work together. But yeah, that's kind of the idea behind a lot of this. Everything in here, everything in any world is manipulatable. Anything, I can inspect this orb over here. And I've got a wireframe orb. This has a material applied to the actual sphere mesh. So it's just a sphere mesh with a collider and a grabbable component. The grabbable is what allows me to grab it and move it around. Then I can, oh, Fruxus is now online. Then I can actually open up the material and I can change the material. So the actual properties of that material. Here, let's pull this over here and look at it. So you can see there's a yellow and pink on the wireframe material. This is the one right here, the red and the yellow. So if I change that red to blue, you can see it change there in real time. And keep in mind, this is in real time, so anybody else that actually joins me in this world would see these updates in real time. So it's a very powerful way of collaborating. You'll also notice that since I changed that here, that material is also applied to this, and so that has changed to the blue and the yellow. Let's see, it's this one. So yeah, dev tools. And so I keep those on there. And these are other just different various tools that I can work with. And here's some of the more kind of complex tools on the back of my tool shelf. Show you next this Logix tool. So Logix is this scripting language that we talked about when we first started here. And this tooltip is what allows you to work with these logic nodes. You first open it up and you go to your node selector, and this gives you a bunch of, basically we call these nodes, but it's kind of like comparable to a function, right? So under network specifically is where this get string node is. So if I highlight that, you'll see the text on my tooltip change to get string. And if I double click out here, it spawns a new node. So that node now has inputs. This pulls in a URL, and this is the actual pulse or the request. So you have to basically say, run a pulse to go get the data. It's like executing the function basically. And then it outputs a string, and it outputs the pulse as well. So you could say after, like for this one, after you're done getting the string, what do you do next? You write it to a variable. So that's kind of logics there. Any of these you can see what their data types are and everything just by hovering over them. You can click on it to pull it out, and that's the connector. And then if I hit my secondary action, it just creates a pulse node, and that's what actually executes this function. So you can see how this could get pretty crazy. And this blueprint behind here is created by a company that's formed within Neos, all around Neos. They only work in Neos, and they build things like this blueprint, which allows you to kind of organize your logics a little bit better. It's almost like an IDE within Neos for logics, because if you look at if you look, let me show you what the logics before blueprints looks like. You've heard the term spaghetti code before, right? This is like true spaghetti code, like the visual representation of spaghetti code. So here's my whole like object model. Basically, this is like my document. This is my root. This is all of the things in there. I'm going to find, I don't have it very well organized at this point, as you can see. But I do have, there we go, like consensus stats. So within this hierarchy, you have a whole bunch of stuff. If I take this object and grab that, open here, reveal logics nodes, you can see all of the logics behind all of these things. And so this is basically, you're looking at the code, the scripting behind each one of these. You can see there's a pulse here that's doing the get string. This is the /latest from the endpoint. It's going out, writing that to a variable. It's parsing it into an actual string type so that I can manipulate it a little bit, and then controlling it with this controller. So this controller is associated to this label, and I can pipe the data into that. Here's the base URL. So all of these are actually connected to this base URL, pulling that array, so that I can quickly and easily I could switch this like to my local host basically, and then pull the data from my local host versus Heroku. And then up here is kind of the pulse controller. I could manually set a pulse to say, go get new data for everything, or I have it set on a timer for 5 seconds. And so that goes through a sequence of pulses for every single controller. And you can see, like, it actually looks like spaghetti. It's true like spaghetti code. And I've seen many different logic setups that are just very hard to comprehend because of how they're laid out and everything. And so this blueprint kind of tries to tackle that problem. Let's make these not only easier to read and understand, but it also kind of modularizes things, because you can actually put blueprints within blueprints. And so I could create this random validator function, and then I could create another blueprint for that and collapse this in order to just have this amount of logics showing, and I've just got my input and my output for that full function to get the random validators. And then I can do another blueprint over here that would then do the parsing, collapse that down into this, and then I don't have this problem. So so now that I know about blueprints, I could totally just spend the time to convert this to blueprints, which I don't know if I'll ever do that, but yeah. So yeah, that's it's kind of a quick walkthrough of Neos, and something I've built in Neos, been working on for the last few months actually, learning about logics and how to build things in here, and taking it from the stance of how would you get a web app into virtual reality, and what would that look like? And it's one big experiment for me, really. Just how do you do that, and what does it look like, and yeah, all of that. So let's see, how are we doing on time? 8:25. Any questions from anybody?